My name is Alexandria, and for most of my life, I believed loyalty was something you earned by giving more than anyone else. I was the dependable one, the quiet fixer, the girl who showed up early and left late. I learned that skill young, watching my family fall apart in slow motion while I stood in the middle, holding everything together with duct tape and denial. By the time I was 22, I was already working 2 jobs, finishing night classes, and sending money home every month. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself family meant sacrifice. What I didn't understand then was that sacrifice can quietly turn into permission. Permission for people to take, and take, and take until there's nothing left but the expectation that you'll somehow refill yourself. The money wasn't supposed to be touched, ever. That was the rule. It was my future fund. The account I built with overtime hours, skipped meals, and years of saying no to anything that felt like joy. I didn't tell many people about it, but my mother knew. She insisted on being added just in case, the way she always insisted, sweet voice, tight smile, reminding me how much she'd done for me growing up. I agreed to keep the peace, the same way I always had. For years, the balance grew. 6 figures, a quiet promise to myself that one day I could breathe. Then one Tuesday morning, between sips of burnt coffee and unread emails, I checked my banking app. The number blinked once, then settled into a reality my brain refused to accept. Liam, no warning. No fraud alert. Just one clean withdrawal, authorized, complete, devastating. The name next to it belonged to my mother. I stared at my phone so long my hands went numb. Every memory replayed at once: late nights, sore feet, empty apartments. Every moment I chose responsibility over comfort. All of it erased in one signature that wasn't mine. I drove to her house without thinking, my heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. She opened the door smiling, already defensive, like she knew exactly why I was there. When I asked where the money was, she sighed dramatically, rolled her eyes, and said, "Relax, Alexandria. It went to something important." Important. To her, it meant my brother's business rescue. A failing startup she'd always believed in more than she ever believed in me. "Family helps family," she said, crossing her arms. "You'll make more money. You always do." That was the moment something shifted. Not anger, clarity. She didn't steal because she was desperate. She stole because she was confident I wouldn't fight back. And standing there in her doorway, listening to her justify destroying my future like it was a minor inconvenience, I realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. My family didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource. And resources, in their minds, exist to be used. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. That surprised her more than anything. My mother was used to emotional reactions, used to wearing people down with guilt and exhaustion. When I turned around and walked away without another word, I could feel her confusion burning into my back. She thought silence meant surrender. What she didn't know was that silence was me switching modes. It wasn't her daughter anymore. I was a woman preparing to take back what was stolen. That night, I spread everything out on my kitchen table like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, pay stubs, emails where I'd clearly labeled transfers as future fund, and education savings, notes I'd written to myself after long shifts, reminding me why I was doing this. There was a story in those papers, and it wasn't hers to rewrite. As I organized everything into neat piles, the emotional fog lifted. Facts replaced feelings, and facts I knew were dangerous to the right people. The next call I made wasn't to my family. It was to someone who'd never asked me for $1. Marcus. He wasn't blood, but he'd been there through every version of me broke. Hopeful, exhausted, rebuilding. When I told him what happened, he didn't interrupt. He just listened. When I finished, he said one sentence that changed everything. "Alexandria, joint access doesn't mean moral ownership." Then he asked me if I wanted revenge or resolution. I told him I wanted accountability. He smiled like he already knew how this would end. The bank confirmed what I already knew. Legally authorized. Emotionally indefensible. But the paper trail mattered. Intent mattered. And most importantly, the use of the funds mattered. My mother hadn't just moved money around. She'd transferred it directly into my brother's company, an LLC, drowning in debt, already under scrutiny for financial misrepresentation. That was the crack in the wall. All I had to do was widen it. Meanwhile, the family group chat exploded. I was painted as dramatic, selfish, ungrateful. My brother sent a message saying, "You'll get it back eventually. Don't make this a thing." That sentence lit a fire in me I didn't know existed. Eventually is what people say when they're comfortable with you. Suffering in the meantime. I stopped responding. Let them talk. Every word they sent only proved what? I already knew. They weren't worried about right or wrong. They were worried about consequences. By the end of the week, I had a lawyer, a timeline, and something my family never expected me to have: leverage. Not loud, messy revenge. Strategic, undeniable truth. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to threaten. I was going to expose exactly how easy it had been for them to take from me and how expensive it was about to become. Because the biggest mistake they made wasn't stealing my money. It was assuming I'd protect them from the fallout. The confrontation didn't happen at a kitchen table or over a tearful phone call. It happened in a conference room with glass walls and fluorescent lights, where emotions didn't matter, documents did. My mother walked in confident, dressed like respectability could shield her. My brother followed, irritated, already acting like this was an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. I watched them take their seats, watching me like I was still the child they could pressure into compliance. They had no idea the version of Alexandria sitting across from them no longer needed their approval to breathe. When my lawyer laid out the evidence, the room went quiet in a way that felt final. Transaction trails, email confirmations, proof that the money was transferred directly into a company, account under investigation, proof that my mother had verbally acknowledged that the funds were mine, intended for my future, not family redistribution. My brother's face drained of color as realization set in. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. This was exposure, and exposure doesn't care how close you are to the people it burns. My mother tried to pivot, as expected. She talked about intentions, about stress, about how she'd meant to tell me. Then she tried guilt. "I raised you," she said softly, like it was a trump card. I looked at her and felt nothing but distance. "You raised me to be responsible," I replied. "You don't get to punish me for succeeding." That was when she understood control had finally slipped out of her hands. The settlement wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no tears, just numbers, repayment, asset liquidation, legal fees, terms that ensured she could never access another account tied to my name again. Watching her sign felt surreal. This woman who once towered over my decisions now had to initial every page because of them. My brother didn't look at me once. I didn't need him to. Accountability doesn't require eye contact. After it was over, I didn't feel joy. I felt peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop arguing with reality and start responding to it. I walked out into the sunlight knowing something fundamental had changed. Not just for me, but for how they'd remember me. I was no longer the reliable safety net. I was the boundary. People think revenge is about destruction. It's not. It's about truth introduced at full volume. I didn't burn their world down. I just stopped holding it up. And when it collapsed under its own weight, they finally learned what it cost to underestimate a woman who was done being convenient. After the conference room showdown, the fallout spread quietly but aggressively. My mother retreated into silence, the kind that screams louder than words ever could. For a week, I didn't hear from her, and for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like victory. My brother, usually quick to lecture me about family loyalty and not making waves, avoided my gaze in every interaction. His sense of control had evaporated overnight. replaced by guilt so thick you could practically taste it. Even my father, who had always stayed in the background hoping no one would notice his complicity, finally picked up the phone without hesitation. He apologized not for the act itself, but for letting it happen. And in that small admission, I realized that exposure had consequences far beyond the money. It changed the dynamics of power in my family. And for the first time, they weren't calling the shots. I began to see patterns in every interaction we'd ever had. My mother's insistence that I be responsible, that I always save, that I endure quietly, it wasn't love. It was preparation to exploit me when she needed leverage. And for the first time, I wasn't a willing participant. I started taking inventory, her lies, her manipulations, the way she always made my sacrifices feel like obligations rather than choices. I wrote them down one by one like bullets in a dossier. Each one fueled me, sharpened my focus, reminded me why I'd gone through with the confrontation in the first place. Revenge wasn't about being cruel. It was about reclaiming narrative, reclaiming control, and teaching her a lesson she could neither charm nor cheat her way out of. And yet, even in the midst of triumph, I felt a strange emptiness. Money had been recovered, or at least promised, but the trust, the fragile thread of family connection I had hoped to preserve, was gone. Mia sensed it too. She watched quietly, asking fewer questions about college, less eager to tell me about scholarship possibilities. Her innocence had been disturbed, her belief in grandparents shaken. I understood that, and it hurt more than any legal battle. I reassured her, over and over, that what had happened wasn't her fault, that standing up for herself and for her future wasn't just. Right, it was necessary. She nodded, silent but resilient. And in her silence, I found a mirror of the version of myself I wanted her to be, strong, relentless, unwilling to allow anyone to take what she earned. That night, I didn't celebrate. I organized. Every conversation, every document, every detail from the bank and the lawyer's office was cataloged meticulously. I wasn't done. The legal process might take months, maybe even a year. But in that moment, I felt the thrill of strategy, power, and a lesson being learned. Slowly but unmistakably, by the people who had underestimated me for too long. Weeks turned into months, and the lawsuit became a slow-burning storm. Each hearing, each mediated conversation, felt like a chess match where every word, every gesture could shift the balance. My mother tried every tactic, pleading, intimidation, emotional manipulation, but I stayed methodical. I had my lawyer Sandra on my side, my father quietly assisting when he could, and Marcus occasionally giving me insights into the psychology of confrontation. Even my brother started to understand, through his own mortification, that the old rules of family hierarchy didn't apply anymore. I wasn't the scared daughter. I was a player, and the game had changed. Every phone call from my mother now felt like a calculated risk. Would she try to guilt me? Threaten exposure of some minor secret? Attempt to charm me with nostalgic memories? I let none of it distract me. Each attempt reinforced my resolve, and I realized something critical. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about precision. It's about waiting for the exact moment when consequences will hit the hardest, and when the lesson will be undeniable. The local court system was intimidating, but I learned to use it like a scalpel. Each document I submitted, each invoice from vendors, every email thread was evidence not just of theft, but of intent and disregard. I began to notice a change in people outside the family as well. Judges, clerks, even opposing attorneys could see the clarity of my case. I wasn't emotional. I was organized, credible, irrefutable. My mother's confidence began to falter, just enough to show cracks in the polished persona she had relied on for decades. And that's when the whispers started. Extended family members who had been quiet spectators began to call, text, or visit, quietly expressing support. I didn't know, one aunt admitted. I always suspected, but you were too polite to say anything. That quiet acknowledgement felt like an ally forming in the shadows. I learned quickly that family dynamics can shift subtly, that victories are often about who watches and who finally believes the truth. And through it all, Mia grew stronger. She began to sit with me at the table, asking questions, helping me organize documents, learning the language of law and negotiation. I wanted her to see that justice isn't abstract. It's not something that happens by chance. It's something you pursue relentlessly, even when the people around you call it petty or dramatic. The court hearings continued, but each day, the pressure mounted on my mother. She had miscalculated, assuming I would fold under the weight of shame and guilt. She hadn't counted on me transforming betrayal into strategy, and every time she made a motion, I was ready, anticipating it, countering it, showing a side of myself that she had never allowed herself to see. Ruthless in pursuit of fairness, unapologetic, unyielding. Then came the turning point. My mother, once confident in her ability to control the narrative, finally realized she couldn't charm her way out. During a deposition, when asked about the transfers to my brother's company, she hesitated. She stumbled over words she had long rehearsed, contradicting herself in ways that my lawyer had predicted. Her voice, once commanding, wavered. Her careful facade was cracking under the weight of evidence. Every document, every email I had meticulously gathered was being reviewed by professionals, trained to spot deception. I could see it in the room, the slight, almost imperceptible flinch whenever she realized a statement she made could be used against her. That moment I understood fully what revenge truly meant. It wasn't shouting. It wasn't public humiliation. It was orchestrating the truth so precisely that those who believed themselves untouchable were exposed. Without a single exaggeration, I watched my mother squirm, and though part of me felt satisfaction, another part felt the weight of what I had done. We weren't talking about trivialities. This was a person I had called mother, a family I had loved, now being held accountable. Yet, I reminded myself constantly, Mia's future was at stake. Every hesitation, every delay could cost her opportunities, experiences, even dreams. That knowledge gave me clarity and focus that no anger could provide. When the judge finally reviewed the evidence, the outcome was inevitable. My mother agreed to a settlement that included full restitution, structured repayment, and legal safeguards, ensuring no future access to my accounts or assets tied to Mia's future. The feeling wasn't sweet. It was solid, grounding. I had turned what could have been chaos into consequence, and in that moment, I realized that revenge had a shape, a form. It wasn't destruction, it was reclaiming justice in a way that could be measured, recorded, and protected. After the proceedings, the family's silence was telling. No words of congratulations, no reassurances, just quiet acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted. I returned home that night, exhausted, yet resolute, Mia asleep upstairs, unaware of the meticulous battles fought on her behalf. The realization settled in my chest. I had finally drawn a line. I had shown that betrayal has limits, that greed has consequences, and that a mother's love, if absent, cannot excuse theft. And as I lay in bed, feeling the weight lift, I understood that revenge, when executed with precision, is not cruelty, is justice. The days after the settlement felt strange, like walking through a familiar room that had been rearranged while I wasn't looking. The air was thick with silence from the family, a tension so palpable that even casual interactions felt like high-stakes negotiations. My mother stopped calling. My brother avoided eye contact, offering forced politeness in the rare moments he had to speak. And yet, I didn't feel victory in the way the movies promise. I felt empowerment, a clarity that comes only when you realize that you are no longer a passive participant in someone else's game. I spent long nights talking to Mia, guiding her through the reality of family dynamics, of loyalty, and of self-respect. I wanted her to understand, even at 18, that boundaries aren't optional. They are the foundation of survival. We walked together through every detail of the restitution account, every safeguard put in place, Each step wasn't just about recovering stolen funds, it was about reclaiming dignity, rewriting the rules that had been ignored for too long. And in that process, I discovered something unexpected. Revenge, carefully plotted and executed, has a transformative power. It reshapes you, sharpens your instincts, teaches your patience, and demands clarity. I saw in Mia the same spark I'd felt in myself. A combination of righteous anger and careful strategy. She began asking questions about contracts, legal language, and how to track finances. She was learning that power isn't given, it's claimed. And sometimes, it comes in the form of someone refusing to be silenced. Outside our home, life shifted too. Extended family members, previously allies of convenience, approached with subtle acknowledgement. One cousin, usually dismissive and sarcastic, admitted almost shyly that they'd long suspected favoritism but hadn't dared speak up. Another aunt expressed regret for remaining silent. These quiet admissions reminded me that truth, once revealed, resonates far beyond the immediate sphere of conflict. Even my father, who had stood on the sidelines for decades, seemed lighter, less burdened by complicity. He would make small gestures, checking in, offering insight, quietly validating my choices. In every interaction, I noticed a single pattern. Power shifted when truth was wielded fearlessly. And yet, the most critical transformation was internal. I wasn't driven by anger anymore. I wasn't obsessed with punishment. My motivation was protection, reclamation, and foresight. I had finally broken free from the toxic cycle that had shaped my life, proving to myself that accountability is not optional, and that standing firm, even in the face of betrayal, is a radical act of love. The ripple effects of confrontation reached beyond the courtroom and the settlement. My mother's social dominance, her carefully curated persona of control, and her assumed invincibility in the family hierarchy were shattered. Even casual gatherings, once dominated by her presence, now carried the subtle tension of fear and respect. She knew that every eye in the room silently measured her actions, that every word she spoke could be questioned, cross-referenced, or exposed. I began to notice the micro-expressions, the twitch of her lips when someone mentioned fairness, the hesitation before she offered advice, the careful calculation before interacting with Mia, resilient and perceptive beyond her years, began to reclaim her confidence. She realized, slowly but surely, that power doesn't always reside in age or tight-lit, resides in principle, preparation, and willingness to act. Together, we began creating structures that would prevent future exploitation. Separate accounts, joint decisions only where trust was established. Financial literacy and constant vigilance became our new normal. Each precaution was a lesson, a reminder that betrayal doesn't have to define you, it can refine you. At the same time, I found a deeper satisfaction in the subtle consequences my mother experienced. She had to downsize her lifestyle, restructure her assets, and accept that her influence no longer extended unchecked. For years, she had relied on manipulation and perceived dominance to maintain control. Now, every choice she made was scrutinized, measured unlimited by the very principles she had ignored. And the irony wasn't lost on me. She had always prided herself on foresight, on planning for long-term security. Yet she failed to predict that a daughter armed with clarity, documentation, and legal strategy could outmaneuver her. I discovered a dangerous but exhilarating truth. Calculated accountability doesn't just punish wrongdoing, it exposes weaknesses, corrects patterns, and educates even those unwilling to learn. Meanwhile, my relationship with the extended family subtly shifted. People who had once silently condoned my mother's favoritism or accepted her narrative began seeking insight from me. Sometimes hesitantly, sometimes cautiously, they wanted the story, the perspective they hadn't been allowed before. I realized that by standing firm, I wasn't only protecting myself and Mia, I was rewriting the boundaries of influence for everyone around us. And in that rewriting, I felt a profound liberation, an unshakable awareness that the consequences of actions, both for those who take and those who endure, not negotiable. When truth is wielded with precision. Months later, standing at Mia's university orientation, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The campus sprawled before us, majestic buildings, bustling students, the energy that hinted at possibility and achievement. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I felt the culmination of every sacrifice, every battle, every quiet struggle I had endured. Mia turned slowly, eyes wide, soaking in the reality of her future. I squeezed her hand, feeling both relief and pride. She had witnessed resilience, learned the power of boundaries, and observed firsthand that injustice can be challenged with precision and courage. That moment, I realized, was the true victory. Not the recovered funds, not the legal victory, not even the humiliation of my mother. It was the knowledge that we, together, had taken control of our narrative. I had taught Mia that betrayal is never acceptable, that greed must meet consequences, and that the bond of family does not excuse wrongdoing. Even now, our relationship with my mother remains distant, polite, minimal. But the story isn't one of hate. It's one of survival and strength. My mother's lessons, twisted though they were, became a backdrop to my own transformation. I am no longer the passive observer, the accommodating child, or the silent sacrificer. I am a mother, a strategist, a woman who demands accountability, and a daughter who refuses to allow history to repeat itself. And as Mia walked toward her dorm, her face glowing with hope and determination, I understood that revenge, when executed with precision and integrity, is not about cruelty. It is about justice, empowerment, and protection. I finally knew what it felt like to stand tall in the face of betrayal and to transform pain into power. That was the real inheritance I could give my daughter. The knowledge that no one, not even those who claim to love you, can take what is rightfully yours if you are willing to fight for it with patience, intelligence, and unshakable courage. In that truth, I found freedom, and in Mia's eyes, I saw the future I had fought for, unbroken, unstoppable, and hers to claim.